No, I'm just so grateful there are no pictures of me on the beach. I do have to say, thanks to Meg, I feel better organized and better prepared for a meeting than I think I ever have before. I just sort of wish it extended also to my talk. I wish perhaps if I had found one of those 45-minute segments, we could have spent some time together. I should begin by giving you just a brief prefatory note about what these ideas represent to us and why we're interested in them. And I can think of no better example to play off of than the press conference that we just had, that we just witnessed. We have a set of high leverage practices. A lot of important and very good work has gone into identifying them, sifting through all of the candidates, looking for things that carry the sort of warrant that would recommend their being nominated to the field as things worthy of attention. And after all of that work, one might think you're at sort of an ending place, ready to make good things happen. I have a colleague who rains on such moments always with the phrase, "Now all that remains is everything." Tony Breik, who's the current president at the Carnegie Foundation, myself, Luis Gomez, Alicia Gruneau, a couple of others there who sort of lead the development of these ideas and their exploration, are all by background researchers. We are recovering psychometricians and the like. And throughout what for some of us is getting on towards being a lengthy career now, one of the questions that has sort of plagued us, or at least has come back to pose itself for reconsideration several times over the course of my career, Tony's career, is the simple question, what should R&D actually look like if it's going to enjoy a productive relationship with practice and really make a contribution to the improvement of practice? And one of the things that we've learned with some disappointment over the years is that traditional R&D simply cannot do that. It exists for a very different purpose. It is participated in by very different people who you would want to pull together if providing knowledge about the improvement of practice really was your purpose. And it uses methods and methodologies that sort of militate against producing what these days I think of as improvement knowledge, knowledge that can work on real problems of practice and produce the kinds of results and the kinds of knowledge that can contribute to the improvement of practice. And so beginning in 2008, and me actually a year later, but when Tony first got to the foundation, went to work trying to think about this question of how R&D might be reinvented, how it might be constituted such that those who participate in it, the methods that they use, are all able to serve well a very different purpose than traditional theory-building research, than traditional constitutive research, and the kinds of methods and controls that are used in order to serve the goals of constitutive or theory-building research. You'll hear that a bit as a theme. And what we hope we have done, what we think we have done, in fact, and what we have seen some success working ourselves and us with others to do, is to apply a complementary set of tools to those of traditional R&D to actually figure out how to produce improvement knowledge, the kind of knowledge that can inform the improvement of practice. That's, for us, what these ideas are about. And one of the very first premises of these ideas, the first, actually, it is literally the first of a set of 6 core principles of improvement science, is that you want to make your work problem-centered. You want to center on a real problem of practice. And so I'm going to begin this talk with a real problem of practice. I'm going to begin this talk, which is about improvement science carried out in networks, with an example of the very problem that we felt we needed a new, different, revitalized form of R&D. And this problem comes to us from reading recovery. People in the room know reading recovery? A number of us. I want to say right off the bat, we love reading recovery. We have a lot of respect for it. It has, it's very well considered, well thought out, well conceived. It usually comes with tremendous supports for its implementation. And yet, we also are able to exemplify the essential problem of traditional R&D that gives rise to this thing that we've been working on, improvement science carried out in networks, or these things that we call networked improvement communities. Uh-oh. Oh. No, we're not the thank you part. The thank you part comes at the end if we all get there. Should I just use this thing, I think? Or? Okay. This one, right? Yeah. I'll use that. Beautiful. So with thanks to the reading recovery folks who've given us permission, in fact encouraged us to use this example of the problem of traditional R&D, what I want to do is share with you the results of the first year of a randomized controlled trial looking at reading recovery. 282 schools randomly assigned 141 of them into the treatment condition, where they learned and labored hard to implement reading recovery, 141 assigned into a control condition. And at the end of the first year, when they examined the results, they saw what was a pretty impressive positive effect. An average effect size that was in fact a 0.7, and very quickly, because I hope we aren't all researchers here. As you know, the thing that researchers seek more than anything else is that asterisk that says statistically significant. Well, unfortunately, that asterisk only answers one of 2 really important questions if you want to know whether to pay any attention to these results. That asterisk says, what's the chance that this happened randomly? What's the probability that this happened just by chance? And if that chance is very, very low, then we're willing to say, must have been something systematic going on. And that's half of an important story, knowing that there's likely something that caused that in some systematic way is an important but only part of the information you probably need to know whether to care about these results. The other piece of information you need is, are these results big enough that they're worth paying any attention to? So statisticians created this thing called the average, the effect size. And what you need to know about the effect size is that it runs, practically speaking, it actually runs from negative to positive infinity, but practically speaking from -3 to +3. 0 means no difference between the treatment and the control group. As you get increasingly more positive, you're increasingly excited about things. 0 to 3 is usually thought of by rule of thumb as not terribly worth a lot of additional attention. 0.3 to 0.6 or so is generally considered moderate and worth some additional consideration. And 0.6 on up, the statisticians head for the cold showers. This is considered big enough that when coupled with statistical significance is probably worth paying some attention to and considering implementing ourselves. So in the first year of these results from this randomized controlled trial, what they got for the reading recovery program was a statistically significant finding and an effect size of 0.7, definitely in the moderately strong range. The problem is, as you could well imagine, that's only part of a story, because this is an average effect size across 141 implementations of these ideas. This is an average effect size over the 141 schools that were assigned into the treatment. The actual distribution looks like this. And there are 2 or 3 things I'd really like you to know about this distribution. The first is that down at the negative end, at the low end, we have quite a number of schools with 0 or even negative impact. Quite a few places where problems of implementation clearly still exist, even though it's a very well supported program, very well specified, and very well supported in its implementation. These are places where improvement problems still abound, and they're numerous. They're almost 1 in 5, 16%, almost 1 in 5. Up at the high end of the distribution, there's a similar number where extraordinarily good things are happening. And our traditional research is not going to teach us anything about what it is that's going on that's extraordinarily good up there. In improvement science, these are referred to as positive deviance, a name which delights me because, frankly, I think the perverts have been giving deviance a bad name for a long, long time. So we have this thing called positive deviance, and they are places where we could learn how effective implementation happens in order to implement well. But unfortunately, traditional R&D is not going to deliver that lesson. It's not going to explore or teach us about that at all. So what it's caused us to do is to rethink the challenge. Because if the researchy guys were being completely disclosing to us, completely honest and completely disclosing, here is what they would say when they get that asterisk. They would say, this program is significant at alpha is equal to or less than something magical. It has a strong positive effect size. It can work, and it will work for you. Here's the part that they really never seem to say, but need to. And it will work for you as long as you do exactly what we did, and you do it in places exactly like those where we did it. And that's never going to happen again. It's just never going to happen again. There has to be a complement to traditional R&D that can teach us how to make even good ideas work well. In our glib moments, we describe this problem by pointing out that traditional R&D teaches us that something can work, but what we need is to learn how to make it work. And how to make it work effectively, that is to say, well, reliably, that is to say, in many, many different people's hands and heads and hearts, and at scale, that is to say, across numerous, sometimes very diverse contexts. That's the essential challenge of getting good ideas to work for us routinely. There's one other thing I want you to know about this distribution. It is almost identical to the distribution that these schools exhibited when they went into that first year. Almost identical, the same spread, the same range, the same variability. In other words, all of that training, when it came up against the practical exigencies of the real world, did absolutely nothing to compress variability, to know that it could work for everyone. There is still 20% it doesn't work for, 20% that do extraordinarily well with it. We've always had that. What we need is to rethink the challenge. I'll come back to the variability question in a few moments. But what we realized is we needed to rethink the challenge. We need to think about things in terms of how to implement well so that we can do so effectively, reliably, and at scale. We need to build the tools and build the capacities for learning exactly how to do that. And then we needed to figure out how to embed those capacities, those capabilities and capacities in the field so that it can become the new normal in how ideas are put into practice. In other words, we needed to move from what I've written of as, well, many people write about as fidelity of implementation, defined as do exactly what we did or do exactly what we tell you to do, to something that I've written of as integrity of implementation, which I describe as understand deeply the ideas that undergird this effort and remain true to them while adapting it to work in local contexts, and test the changes that you make to know that they're in fact improvements. That's the essence of improvement science, or an R&D that's based on improvement science at work for you. So how did we do this, or how do we go about doing it? Well, we're seeking to integrate two big sets of ideas. The first of them is improvement science, as has existed for 80 to 100 years, though most of that time in business and industry. More recently, and by recently I mean as long as 25 years or so, in healthcare, in child welfare programming, in social and criminal justice domains. In other words, increasingly in professional contexts that are people or others serving. And it's on the strength of successes there that we began to think maybe these ideas can be adapted for education as well. The first set of big ideas, improvement science. And the second big set of ideas, the power of networks. We believe, we're not unique in this, but we're right at the threshold now of having the tools to structure and manage, organize and maintain networks that can engage in collective effort, that can engage in coherent, concerted, collaborative work together to accelerate how we learn and to accelerate how much we learn. What we've been exploring is, what are those structuring agencies? How do you initiate, launch, maintain, and nurture to health a vital network that can engage in coherent, coordinated, collective effort? Those are the two big ideas that we're trying to pull together. One bit of organizing thinking for us, and then I can move into how this is done precisely. We speak of three kinds of problems as improvement problems. The first of these is what you do when you don't have a strong track record to draw upon, what you do when you don't have really strong ideas, programmatically or otherwise, about how best to address some problem. Put another way, this is what you have to do when you don't know what to do. We call these innovation problems. The second kind of problem, what do you do when you have strong ideas about potential solutions, and your challenge now is to make sure that they work over and over and over again, from person to person to person and from place to place to place. These are what are termed adaptive integration problems. And the third, what do you do when you have a system? We define a system, by the way, apropos of our earlier conversations this afternoon about high leverage practices. We define a system as a collection of interdependent processes and practices. What do you do when you have a system, but it isn't performing the way you need it to or want it to? This is a process improvement or optimization problem. Improvement science, as I'll describe it for you, works on any of these three types of problems. But what you put in the foreground and what recedes into the background is what alters in order to make it work well on the kind of problem that you have. There are 6 principles I alluded to, core improvement principles, as we think of improvement science. The first, make the problem user-centered and problem-focused, or problem-centered and user-focused. I've alluded to the whys and wherefores of this a couple of times, actually implicitly already. What we need to do in education is to avoid solutionitis. Avoid the tendency for solutions to roam the countryside looking for places to attach themselves. Because those solutions, even the best of them, were not built with your context in mind. They were not built for you, and we're not recommending that they should be built for you every time. We don't recommend that we all have to reinvent the wheel, but what we are saying is we need an R&D methodology to bring even good ideas like that into effective practice locally through adaptive integration. So you begin by studying the problem and knowing it well. And the only way to do that is to incorporate the expertise and the views who work with or in or close to that problem. There's a certain humility in improvement science in recognizing that the solutions need to be implemented, will ultimately be implemented close to the locus of the problem. And it is the practitioners who work there and their practical expertise that is at least as important as scholarly and academic expertise. In fact, either one of those forms of expertise alone is hollow and unlikely to succeed at scale. But both of them together make for real improvement. Second core principle, variation in performance is the problem to solve. You've already seen a graphic about this. The real challenge is not, can we pick up a really wide distribution with some who perform well and some who don't perform at all well. In fact, some who seem to have negative impact in the field. Can we pick a big distribution up and move it over to the right so that the mean is a bit higher? Yes, we know how to do that. That's actually not the improvement problem to solve. The improvement problem to solve is, can we eliminate unwanted variability in performance so that we can figure out how to make it work for everyone, every single time? In a networked improvement community that we've developed working on developmental mathematics, code for remedial math, each of the 39 institutions involved in that NIC with us, each and every one of them has exceeded its target line for performance. The variability in that distribution has gone from this to about this, and we're actually able to say, because it's implemented in this fashion, we're actually able to see it work in every single one of those schools and to see it work for all of the students therein. That is the essence of the improvement problem to solve. Eliminate unwanted variability. Third core principle of improvement, see the system in order to improve it. Two big, really significant ideas embedded in this core principle. The first is that, as the old improvement joke goes, and that's actually a joke itself because there are no old improvement jokes. I don't think there are any good improvement jokes, actually. But as the glib phrase goes, every system is perfectly designed to get exactly the results it's getting. If you're not happy with the results you're getting, see the system, understand the system, and improve the system. Even if you come in with the best ideas imaginable, integrating them into an extant context, integrating them into a system is essential. And it's essential to do that effectively, reliably, and at scale in order to have even your really smart ideas produce what you hope for from them. But there's also a second idea implicit in that really needs to be said out loud. That the vast majority of the time, when systems are not performing the way we want them to, when we aren't getting the results that we want, it is more likely the system than it is the people who need to be punished until they get it right. Only when you have optimized the system are you in a position to ask the right questions about who best to implement it, et cetera, et cetera. So, what you need to do is you need to understand the problem, you need to understand the system that gives rise to that problem, and you need to build a theory of improvement based on those understandings about how best to improve or address that problem in context. Fourth core principle: you cannot improve at scale what you cannot or will not measure. Absolutely essential to improvement science, at least as we're advocating it, are the common measures that allow vast networks to do meaningful work together, to share results with each other, to learn from each other, to learn through each other, and to learn with each other. These things are only possible when you have coherent measurement systems that assess performance, that assess the changes you make, that investigate what are referred to as the balancing measures, the unanticipated consequences of the actions you've taken, and so on. But one thing you need to know is that measurement for improvement is very, very different from measurement for accountability. Measurement for improvement is embedded in the workflow. It does not call a halt to teaching and learning so that some assessment can happen. It grows out of the teaching and learning. And measurement for improvement is constructed for those who are responsible for teaching and learning so that they can use it for the improvement of teaching and learning. Very, very different than conducting said assessment for the sake of others who are monitoring us or assessing us or seeking to hold us accountable. Measurement is essential. Common measures are essential to good improvement work. Fifth core principle: accelerate improvement by using and applying rigorous methodologies. At the heart of this, there actually is a science. There actually are methodologies. Analytic routines, methodological routines that allow us to implement ideas, modify those ideas, test those ideas to be certain that the changes we make are in fact improvements. And we've worked really hard at building out those to fit in to this fifth core principle. And the sixth and final principle: accelerate learning also by working together in carefully structured networks. I don't think that this one would be much lost on us in education, but the networks that I'm talking about, these networked improvement communities, are both of the same family of many of our professional networks, professional learning communities, communities of practice, et cetera, and in a couple of important ways, unique amongst them as well. Here is the closest that we've been able to come to a bumper sticker defining networked improvement communities. It's not a good reason to go get a bigger car, but it is the best we could do. NICs, as I'll refer to them here, NICs are scientific communities. That is really important. to us. That is very important. And the reason that that's important is that we want improvement knowledge to be respected in the same measure as theory building or constitutive knowledge is. We want improvement knowledge to be warranted and respected so that others can pick it up and work with it. It is a different type of knowledge requiring a different kind of methodological examination. It's not inferior or superior to. It is complementary to traditional constitutive knowledge. And if that's going to be true, then it has to be a scientific enterprise that produces it. It has to be an enterprise in which we make public what we're trying to accomplish, we make public the ways in which we tested that, and we make public our results so that others can understand it, know what sense to make of it, and work with it appropriately. These scientific communities have 4 essential characteristics. First of all, they are focused on a commonly held aim. I should tell you that an aim is kind of a term of science for improvement guys. It has a very, very specific definition. A good aim is clear, unambiguous, and measurable, and it has 4 key parts. It describes what is to be accomplished, by or for whom, to what degree, and by when. And as the second joke in the big book of improvement jokes goes, more is not a number, and soon is not a date. You want to be really, really specific, because part of the purpose of an aim is to galvanize action amongst the members of the NIC. And here is where one of those significant differences from others communities, professional communities, which we think are wonderful, which we've learned a lot from in terms of building and holding and sustaining networks. Those other communities, and I spent years working with one of the very best. The National Writing Project is the nation's longest-lived professional learning community for teachers. In this case, 50 years for teachers who care about writing, the teaching of writing, and the use of writing in their teaching. But I would readily qualify the National Writing Project and other professional learning communities like it as communities of professional sharing. People who come together because they care about some core item or issue. They come together to share, to learn from each other, to learn with each other, to learn through each other. NICs, by contrast, are communities of common accomplishment. They've been very, very clear about what they aspire to do, and it has an unbelievably galvanizing effect on their operations, on who does what within them, and how things proceed, when being clear about getting something done is in the first position. So they are focused on a common aim. They are guided by those things that I referred to earlier, a deep understanding of the problem, the ways in which the system currently produces that problem, and a theory of improvement about how to get traction against that problem. This is the only way that you could get, as we have in a networked improvement community that spans now 75 colleges and universities with over 700 faculty involved looking at developmental mathematics. It's the only way to get coherent, concerted, collaborative action across places as diverse as that, is to share the understanding of the problem, share the ways in which that problem comes into existence and why, and to share a theory of improvement so that each of us can work in a different area of that theory of improvement and yet still be contributing to the rest of our colleagues in the NIC who are doing similar. And that's why we are looking forward to anticipation to the improvement knowledge that they'll produce, and they are doing the same of us. So they're focused on a common aim, guided by this shared understanding of the problem space, the system, and a theory of improvement. They're disciplined by improvement science and the methodologies of inquiry that drive improvement science. I won't even belabor that. I've spoken to that already. And then finally, it is executed in the context of a network with careful structuring agents to make sure that coherent, collaborative action that actually does accelerate improvement is possible. And anybody who wants to tell me how to get rid of that line that appears there, I don't know why that thing. Scientists have been working on it for over 3 years now. Why are networks so important? A small handful of things. First off, networks are immense sources of innovation. In a network large enough, no matter what problem you're working on, there's a good chance somebody has worked on that problem. If they don't actually have the answer, they probably have what Michael Nielsen refers to as the micro-knowledge necessary to build an answer. They are a place where improvement can spring from. Secondly, trying to make this large enough for me to see. I should just step over to there. Sorry. Secondly, they offer diverse contexts in which to test your changes and your ideas. Undergirding everything I've said is the idea that the ambition of this enterprise is to get ideas to work across contexts. Improvement knowledge, we've been thinking hard about what it is, if it's something real and it's something different from traditional theoretical knowledge or constitutive knowledge. I think it is knowledge that answers the following key questions. What works, for whom, and under what conditions? That's what we need to pass along. And the only way to gain that knowledge is to test these ideas across diverse contexts. Then you'll have something that'll give you a leg up when you want to make those ideas work in your context. There are also places that by their nature are especially powerful for testing ideas and disseminating the knowledge gained. I'm going to leave down because time is short. There are places where you can see patterns because you need a network for patterns to emerge. An observation that happens just in my school, just in my district, just at my college is just something that happened where I happen to be. But when that thing occurs over and over and over again, or occurs with modification that's tied to context, I start to see patterns. And that allows me to produce knowledge around which improvement can be built. They also provide a context when you set them up as safe environments, and we work hard to do that, in which results can be compared, both successes and failures, as important things to learn from and to learn together. The idea of this networked improvement community comes to us actually in the first instance from a guy named Doug Engelbart. Does anybody in the room know Doug Engelbart? I do. Doug Engelbart is sort of a hero in Silicon Valley. He was working for SRI with a big grant during the 50s to try to discover just what this new technology, this thing called the computer, might do for humans, how the ways in which, or what should be done with the computer in order for it to really benefit human intellect and human performance. And Doug and his team, well, if you have a taste for these things, you might go to YouTube and look up something called the mother of all demonstrations. It's a bit long at 47 minutes, but if you have a taste for this, you will see the following. The first demonstration of a spreadsheet, the first demonstration ever of word processing, the first demonstration of groupware, shareware, hypertext, hyperlinks, the first demonstration of something that he called social media, That's right, no Doug Engelbart, no Facebook. Wait, I'm reconsidering. And he does the entire demonstration using a box. It's a plywood box. It's about the size of a shoebox in front of him. And it has 3 lights on top, and it has a wire that comes out and is connected to a really big, bulky computer. And he moves it around like this to make things happen up on the screen. Because Doug Engelbart also invented the mouse. And Steve Jobs waited until the day after the patent ran out to take it and build it into the Apple dynasty, part of the dark side of Silicon Valley lore. And by the way, the mother of all inventions is also the world's first video conference, because it would broadcast simultaneously all around the country. It really is fascinating. And one of the things that Doug did was he built the theoretical underpinnings of this thing that we call NICs, Networked Improvement Communities, the kind of knowledge that you can get from a network that you cannot get from any other kind of human organization. All right, I'm just going to conclude by showing you a little bit of what a NIC looks like and how it organizes to do its work. We speak of 3 phases to a NIC. I'm a little uncomfortable calling them phases. I'm very uncomfortable at anything that suggests that they are linear sequential steps, because in point of fact, each one of these 3 phases, while they are initiated along the trajectory of maturation of the NIC, that is, you certainly do start with chartering at phase 1, or at the early stages of NIC initiation. While that's all true, phase 1 never goes away completely. You revisit it periodically. You need to know that your theory of improvement is still working for you, that it doesn't need to be revised, for example. So I show them this way in some hope of capturing the idea that they are overlapping. They're not linear sequential, but even this is a little too step-by-step for me. On the other hand, this is pretty much at the edge of my PowerPoint and graphics ability, so there you have it. So phase 1 is what we do, what we call chartering. Whoops. Is what we call chartering, which is all of that early investigation of the problem, the system, design principles for acceptable solutions. You build the chartering documents for the NIC, the foundational documents that guide its operations. And then, at the same time, you're starting to build out membership in the NIC, identifying who best to have work in it, in order to get the work done that you've set out for yourself in the aim. And then comes the network learning phase. This is where the inquiry engine, the improvement science, or at least the improvement research, takes place. As you prototype ideas, or you bring in ideas from the outside, you modify them and you test them. And you examine them to make sure that the changes you've introduced are in fact improvements. And then you codify the knowledge as improvement knowledge so that it can be shared throughout the network. And then finally, the spread or scaling phase, where what you do is seek to, through formal and informal means, face-to-face and virtual, we have built, for example, a platform that is purpose-built to serve NICs and this organizational structure with their driver diagrams and so forth, to capture that improvement knowledge and to make it available throughout the entirety of an even broadly distributed, widely distributed network. So what's different in this? Well, these are some of the things that I would hope you would take away from this image of how to get good ideas into practice effectively, reliably, and at scale. First of all, consider the approach to making things better that has dominated, at least from the federal level, our educational improvement thinking for 20 years now. Somebody gets a really good idea, and I'm not questioning the inherent goodness of that idea. These are caring people who've worked in and around education. They know that something is needed. They spend a lot of time refining it. They put it out to test in a randomized controlled trial. That takes at least 5 to 7 years. And then if it's fortunate enough to come up with a good set of confirmatory results, it goes on to a list of similar, what we like to refer to as evidence-based practices or research-proven approaches or something of that sort. And then we establish the conditions, the incentives, or even in some instances insist that people select from that list. And that's how improvement happens. I want to point out just one thing about this. There are 65 practices in the What Works Clearinghouse for middle grades mathematics. Every one of them has a randomized controlled trial with some successful results behind it. That puts it on the list of beatified practices that we are all to choose from, because that's how we're going to make the world better. Do you know how many of those practices has ever been tested a second time? Exactly 0. The problem isn't too much science, it's actually not enough science, or at least not enough good science, and certainly not enough of the right kind of science. And that's what we're attempting to overturn, because this model of improvement, this approach to making things better, I find fascinating. Because if there's one thing I think almost all educators would agree with, no matter what side of the ideological or intellectual aisle you sit on, is the phrase, there's no such thing as a silver bullet. And yet this approach, which has dominated our thinking for 20 years, is nothing if not silver bullet thinking. Yes, with some science attached to make sure that that silver is real silver. But as a change approach, that's a whole different thing. As a theory of change, that's a whole different thing. So what improvement science offers in its stead is this networked improvement approach to enable a shift to learning well how to implement effectively. And then we think improvement will happen. Conceptually, what are some of the differences? Well, it represents a shift from an approach where we implement fast and wide, and in our cynical moments at the foundation, and hope for the best, to an approach in which we learn how to implement well so that we can be effective. It's a shift from, and I've been over this territory already, I don't want to or need to belabor it, it's a shift from mean estimates of performance, effect sizes, if you will, to an exploration and an elimination of unwanted variability as the point of implementation. It's a shift from an approach that seeks out and then beatifies what works to an approach to figuring out how to make it work effectively, reliably, and at scale. As I said earlier, it's a movement away from a methodology that teaches us that something can work towards a methodology that teaches us how to make it work over and over and over again. It's a shift from an age-old debate in education about whether education is in fact a science or an artisanal activity to the idea, and hopefully no one will take offense by this, you sit squarely in this new way of thinking when you propose high leverage practices. The idea that there can be routines that good professionals master and then preserve their professionalism, because standard routines does not mean standardized practice. Not by a long shot. That's terribly misunderstood. The reason why we go to high leverage practices, the reason why we go to routines demonstrated to have an impact, use improvement science to learn how to implement them well in this context is to reduce the cognitive load so that professionals can attend to professional issues. It's a shift from individual autonomy as the singular hallmark of the culture and the ethos to an idea that we can, in fact, make these improvements happen only if we actually work together effectively. And the very last one, which actually is the one that I find personally most meaningful after 40 years trying to be an education researcher that helps practice in any way. It's a shift from an age-old dichotomy that we've set up and lived with in education. The idea that some people are producers of knowledge and others are users of that knowledge, with the strongly implied hierarchy between the two, to the proposition that each of those alone is hollow and empty, and only by bringing them together, only when we are all called on to both produce and use the knowledge we produce, are we likely to become improvers. It's a shift, therefore, to turn Washington's phrase on its head, it's a shift from evidence-based practice towards practice-based evidence. Thank you.